So welcome to another episode of the Jobs for Women podcast. I'm really excited. I say that every week. I'm really excited, but I am really excited to welcome this week's guest. We have Carly Parry, who is a self-leadership coach. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
I'm so excited you're here. I feel like we connected months and months and months and months ago, and we have spoken loads, haven't we? And we finally made it happen.
We have spoken loads. It's actually been just really nice to have someone to chat to, about all this kind of stuff. And, when you see things that are inspiring or really resonate, actually being able to reach out and just have some really interesting conversations about stuff. So it's exciting that it's finally happening and we're here. So
yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I feel we connected and we're pretty similar, business women, and I've even bounced ideas off you as I've been developing Jobs for Women, which is always really I always appreciate, because it can be a lonely space, can't it, setting up a business?
Well, that's the thing, and it's the reality is, if we're talking about these topics, we have to walk the talk is the phrase I'm looking for, and supporting each other, because running a business is lonely, and it is just nice to have someone to chat back and forth with about things. I think it's sort of really underplayed how much we need other people. I think we're in a society now where you constantly see, I did it on my own, and doing it by yourself and being independent. But I think the meaning behind those things is lost. Yes, you need to do certain things by yourself because no one can do it for you, but that doesn't mean that you can't have people supporting you, listening to you, and just making you feel seen and heard. I think we're massively missing that, and so it's just really nice to find somebody to have that experience with. So
talk to us. Self-leadership coach. It's going to be one of those days, when you wake up in the morning, I'm like, I think it's going to be one of those days, and you know what, I'm just going to roll with it. Talk to us about the self-leadership coach. What do you do?
So I basically work with sort of frustrated action takers or change makers, and high achievers. And so what I do is I help them to basically rediscover the skills that they already have to sort of lead their own lives and create the impact that they actually want to create, whether that's at home or at work or in their communities. Because we have all these things within us already, just sometimes with all the noise of everything that goes on, we just kind of lose touch with those things. So that's the kind of work. So whether that's through coaching programs, or masterclasses, that's the kind of work I do.
So, when you talked about losing touch, do you think that perhaps we're losing touch with our, goals, where we want to be in life, because why is it? Is it because we're too busy? Is it because we don't know who we are?
I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination of all of those things. I think some of us know where we want to go, but we don't know how to get there, or we're too busy to keep it kind of in the forefront of our mind. And I think as well, sometimes that busyness just dampens down who we are and who we want to be, and actually what we want from life. I think society just throws at us all these things we should be doing, all these things we should want, all these things that mean success, that we lose sight of what we really want. And often, when I start dealing with clients, they'll be like, they know what they don't want, but they've lost sight of what they do want, because they've started to disconnect with themselves, because they've kind of bought into what everybody else tells them they should be, what everybody else tells them a good worker looks like, or a good mother looks like, or a good partner looks like, and they don't really know what they want or need anymore. They've kind of sort of put themselves a bit down the pecking list, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is so interesting just as a topic. You know, when you think about it, like I often think about my early career and there wasn't social media and I still found it hard and I didn't know what I wanted, but I kind of did, but I knew I wanted to do well. If I then brought social media in with comparison, looking at what other people are doing, then it makes sense exactly what you just said, that we're comparing ourselves almost so much that we lose sight of what we really want. I bet I bet a lot of people listening can relate to that. So we're going to talk. We're going to kind of, because we talked, didn't we, off the pod? What should we talk about? And we could talk about endless topics. We've just talked for about half an hour before we started recording. And then we said, let's start recording. But we're really going to focus on a subject that I'm really interested in, which is burnout. And I know that you have experienced burnout in your own journey. Can you just give us a little bit of insight into that?
What, into how it was or how I got there?
Yeah, just whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
I mean, I think over my life, I've sort of coped with challenges, basically by overworking. We were talking earlier, I'm very high functioning, so I'll be run to the ground, but you probably wouldn't have any idea, because all my commitments and all my deadlines will still be met, which I think is, that's a topic in itself about the people that suffer burnout that people would never know. And so I had like some personal situations, and then I went back to my corporate job, which I had originally left. And for a while, I was kind of in that survival, sort of finding my ground, finding my feet. And then COVID happened. As I said, my coping mechanism is to overwork. And I was probably starting work at about 5 a.m. Homeschooling, running a household, doing a big project in different time zones. So sometimes I'd still be taking calls to 11, 12 o'clock at night. And eventually it sort of got to the point that I wasn't coping. I think I sort of chalked it up to COVID. But all my work was being done. Like I said, my house was being taken care of, But the thing that kind of got me is I got to this point with it that I just didn't want to help myself anymore. So I'd always been that person, knocked down, I'd have a little cry or have a little rant and sort of dust myself back up, get off, right, this is what I'm going to do. This is the action plan. These are the steps I'm going to take. And I just didn't have that. And I think at this point, I was mid-30s probably, mid to late 30s. And so that was like a challenge in itself, because I was like, I want somebody to do this for me. Like, I don't want to, I am so exhausted. That's the only way I can describe it. I'm so exhausted. I don't want to do it. And for me, that's actually quite a scary place to be, because the reality is no one can do something for you. No one can go to work for you. No one can make you take care of yourself. No one can make you feel good about yourself. I think that's the other thing. There are things that can help and support that, but ultimately that's kind of an inside job. And so then I sort of started doing some work with a coach and exploring various things, and I chalked a lot of it up to, this work environment that I was in. It was super toxic and blah, 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 blah. And I thought, right, I need to leave. But then part of me realized that actually some of it was driven by my own coping mechanisms. So that thing to overwork, that thing to not have boundaries in place. And I remember like a coach, and I was talking to them, they're like, right, you're going to tell them that you're going to take a week off, you're not going to answer your emails. And I was like, oh no, this is not working for me. This is not sitting right. And then I thought, that's a problem. That's a real problem. Like the need that, oh my God, well, what are they going to do? And at the time there was no if there's a major project or something going on, I can be relaxed, but there really wasn't anything. But I just got in the habit that then felt wrong. So I was like, yeah, this is a problem now. And so I did it. And then that kind of sort of kick-started the catalyst for putting boundaries in place and developing more purpose again with the work that I was doing, rather than just saying yes to everything. I think I kind of got into a bit of a scarcity mindset, a bit of a fear mindset, a bit of a constant need for that external validation, not wanting anyone to think that I wasn't capable or competent, or, you know, all those kind of little negative stories that we tell ourselves. And so actually, as I started to address those things, that's when that burnout started to actually lift. And I thought it's interesting, because I think if I'd have upped and left, all of those patterns and behaviors would have just followed me.
Yeah, 100%.
Because I'd be back in that, I've started a new job, I've got to prove I'm capable, I've got to be available, I've got to be seen to be agreeable. You know, all those stories that we tell ourselves make a good worker, which we can probably talk about what actually makes a good worker. That's probably a whole separate podcast. Yeah, so that was kind of the shift. And then I was like, there are so many people, like, you hear all this stuff about burnout, and also as well, a lot of the language about burnout is about managing it. And it's like, no, it's not something you should be managing. Full stop. Like, it comes up, you know, if you kind of, I mean, to make a sort of dramatic comparison, you know, when someone has cancer, for example, that's an illness that you manage, because the end is ultimately, for most people, the end will eventually come from cancer, obviously depending on what type it is. Whereas this is not something that should be part of our daily lives, and it doesn't need to be. It is something that we can eradicate with the right understanding.
Yeah.
So normally when I talk about sort of burnout and overwhelm with clients, it's more about understanding, and in some ways I sort of say working with it, because if you're experiencing burnout, it's your body physically telling you something's not right. It's like the equivalent of, you know, when you get, you know, if you have something that's not supposed to be in your body lodged in it, and your body tries to expel it. Like, it's the same kind of thing. So it's about, right, okay, you're experiencing burnout, you're experiencing overwhelm, you've got all these physical symptoms, all these emotional symptoms. This isn't something you manage. This is something you need to understand so that you don't get ill. We take vaccines so we don't get sick, you know.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of principle. So
I think it's interesting that you started to work with a coach, which is a good step, isn't it, that you recognize that. But I think from what you said as well, I thought what was really, really interesting is that they said, take a week off, don't respond to emails, and your reaction was like, oh, well, I can't do that. But then the coach asking you to do that then made you almost recognize that that's where something wasn't right. So it was almost like the catalyst. It was the turning point, wasn't it? That's
yeah, and I think a big part of the work has to be that awareness. Like, if you're having that reaction, if something, you know, if you feel like you say to yourself, well, I can't not do that one thing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what is the reason? What's the reason behind that? Because we tell ourselves stories, and we're told stories by other people, and it doesn't mean it's true. I think the best, I always say that the piece of advice that changed like the trajectory of my life was many years ago. I was suffering stress and anxiety. So this is nearly a decade ago. So can you see it? It's like gone from stress and anxiety, and then it's later come to full-blown burnout. And I was working with a cognitive behavioral therapist, and they just, as a sort of throwaway comment about something we were talking about, just kind of said to me, you know, just because that's someone's opinion of you doesn't make it true. And I don't know if it's like, you know, like sometimes at certain timing, certain things hit you.
Yeah.
And that literally changed my life, that one piece of advice. And so I think developing that awareness of, okay, this is happening. I'm either having this physical reaction or this emotional reaction about this situation. Do I need to? And why am I? And then you start to identify like what's a true reaction, like a proportional reaction, and actually what's something built in something a lot deeper, a lot more systemic, that maybe isn't actually based in fact, it's based from fear. And once you start doing that, that's kind of when you put yourself back in the driver's seat, as opposed to at the mercy of those reactions, because you know our body is trained to help us survive. But survival that our body's geared for is, you know, are we going to be eaten by a bear? You know, is our neighboring village going to, you know, attack us and take all our sheep? You know, it's that kind of stuff. Whereas today it's my boss sent me that email. There's too much traffic. I'm constantly getting overstimulated by notifications and emails and phone calls and busy schedules, you know, trying to organize where your kids are, your work schedule, what you and your partner are doing when, you know, when you need to get the car MOT'd. Like, it's very different. And we don't have physically, we don't have the processes in place that mean we kind of discharge that energy. So it just kind of bounds around inside of us. And then, you know, we're a lot more cognitively advanced now as well. So then we put stories to those feelings. And so it's like a whole mix. But once you start like stopping and pausing and sort of gaining some consciousness, you can be like, right, is this my body trying to keep me safe? Is it a real threat? Is it something I can alleviate? So yeah, I mean, as humans, we're extremely complicated and it's wonderful and it's beautiful, but it's not always clear cut.
Yeah. I love how you described that energy bouncing around the body, because as you know, like, I'm a yoga teacher. I taught last night and talked a little bit about energy, and I often teach about like clearing blockages and letting the energy move freely. And when you just described that, you know, like all the to-dos, whoever's listening to the podcast now, you know, might have a busy day, busy few weeks, busy months, and it's like, unless you pause, and it's taking those pauses. But how does someone listening to this recognize that they're not pausing, or that they need to pause, or where's the energy going to go? If someone's listening and they're thinking they might be experiencing burnout, what advice would you give to them?
I mean, first of all, like we said, it sort of comes back to that awareness, like, because burnout can show out in two different ways. So you've obviously, you know, you've got the fight and flight. So that's when we talk about that kind of energy bouncing around. And then the other side is like that disconnection, that part where you're living. I always describe it as like you're living your life, you're going through your day, but it's kind of like you're watching it over your shoulder. So you're kind of like just that step behind. So you're not kind of in your body. And they're the two sides. And so it's really about, I think I always suggest like starting off with working out how you react in certain situations. You know, physically, do you feel sort of like more mobilized, that more gotta do energy, or that you know, like tapping, you know, when you're fidgeting, or you've like got to constantly be on the go? Or are you more, I'm here and I'm actually physically not moving my body? Because what you do in those situations is dependent on how you're reacting. Because if you're in that more do energy, for example, you need to physically expel it, maybe with some more active movement. Because maybe if you're very heightened, trying to do something like yoga, you're going to have too much resistance, because you've not trained your body to take maybe a slower pace. So maybe if you were going to do yoga, maybe do something like a vinyasa class, you know, as opposed to, you know, a yin class, or, you know, there's like the differences. So understanding that's key. Whereas if you're maybe more in that kind of disconnected sort of free state, doing something that moves your body, that gets yourself back in connection with it. One exercise I normally sort of suggest for both, so whether you're sort of in that mobilized or you're immobilized state, is what I sort of call that, it's called progressive muscle relaxation. And you just go down your body and you sort of clench. So you might clench your hands for like 5 seconds, 5 breaths, and then release it. And then you might curl yourself up into a ball and release it. So you can do it with different body parts, whatever feels comfortable to you. But the key is to really sort of become aware of that feeling of when you're really clenched, and then notice the difference when you release. And the reason it works for both sides of it is it's still activating enough if you're in that mobilized state, because then you're feeling that tension that you're already feeling, and then you're observing that release, which is then communicating to your nervous system, you know, okay, we've let that go, we can be calm. Whereas if you're in that disconnected state, it's encouraging you to feel sort of an activated sensation by clenching everything and then releasing. So it's kind of helping to bring you back in your body.
I teach that sometimes, but I don't often think to do it in my working day, you know, like in the moment. And are these examples, you know, like there's that high energy, do energy, and then there's the disconnection. Can that change on a daily basis? Can one day I wake up and I'll be, so it's again taking that time to notice each day, every few hours, where you're at, isn't it? It's giving yourself that time and space to pause.
Yeah, I mean, it can change by situation.
Yeah.
So you could go in and out through the day, and some of this is going to depend on your perceptions of danger, maybe around particular situations. And I know some people be like, danger? Well, answering an email isn't dangerous, but that's what we feel, you know. And whether that's because we've developed these coping mechanisms that we have to be perfect so that no one judges us, because we don't want to be judged by other people. There's a whole evolutionary reason behind that. Whether it's, you know, that people pleasing, once again, that falls into that judgment category. You know, we don't want to be exposed to other people. We don't want to feel that we're not good enough. You know, procrastination is more a little bit on that. It's not quite, but it's kind of on that free spectrum. You know, you're avoiding doing the thing because actually it gives you a mini sort of stress relief. Mm-hmm. So you procrastinate. I have a bad habit of what I call productive procrastination. So my productive procrastination is, there's something I want to do, but I'm nervous about doing it, or I don't feel I know how to do it, is sometimes the other thing, and I'm not quite sure, and it feels a little bit overwhelming. I will then do pretty much 101 other things, bar that thing, until I'm literally to the deadline that it's got to be done. Right? And I call that's my productive procrastination, which is great because, you know, I've done all these other things, but I really need to do this one thing first. And once you kind of acknowledge it about yourself, like now I like laugh and joke about it. It's not something to berate myself for. It's just that shows me that that's something outside my comfort zone.
Yeah, I love that. I think I can totally relate to that. Just going back one step, you know, when we talk about this fight or flight, and the opening the email example, I was chatting to a friend recently and we were both similar, depending on, especially for me, hormones, time of the month. We talked about this idea of, you know, when you know, like, I mean, back in the day when I worked in corporate, if a certain person emailed and I had an association about them, the people pleasing, that was a scary, not a bear attack, but, you know, it's if that's the type of person you are, and I bet people listening can relate to that. If there's a certain person or you get chased for something, it can, you know, that reaction, that's real, isn't it? How does someone, if someone is listening and has that, which I know there will be, how do you recognize it and make changes?
I mean, I always think that, I mean, it does depend on your job role, but generally if we're talking emails as an example, it's kind of about putting you back in control a bit. So, you know, like everyone had, as far as I'm concerned, email is not an instant form of communication. It's the same as sending me a letter. It just arrives a lot quicker if vice versa. So my suggestion with that, if you're in that kind of work environment where you can not check your emails instantly, is to say you're going to check them every hour, 2 hours, half hour, whatever it is that works for your job. Because then you can say, right, I'm going to do my emails, and you can just take a little moment beforehand. Whereas, you know, there's nothing worse. You're working on one thing and something pops up and then that's it. You get the pain in your chest, the butterflies go, and then you're like, but I'm doing this. Oh, and I've got to read that email. And then also what happens, you know, if you can link it to even like productivity, is you then get distracted by that. So then you go and sort that thing out, and then you have to come back to doing what you were doing before. And that actually uses a lot of your decision-making capabilities. It uses a lot more energy. And then actually that means that as the day goes on, the more tired you get, the more easily those kind of reactions are going to flood your system, going to drain you of your energy, means you're going to make choices that don't necessarily align with the things you want to be doing. You know, so you may have planned that you were going to go for a nice walk after work. And instead what you do is you come in, you lay on the sofa and you eat a pack of biscuits. I'm not talking from personal experience. And then you're like, well, no, I wanted to do this, and that would have actually made me feel better. Whereas actually I've just kind of put myself in, you know, in a state that I don't want to be. I mean, there is nothing wrong with, you know, watching Netflix and eating a pack of biscuits. But it's like all of these things, there's times when things serve you, and times when things don't. And I think that's always the interesting thing, because I think what happens is as well, like a lot of people berate themselves. Like I find it really hard. People just really lack compassion for themselves, and they talk about, I should know better, I should do better, I know I do this and I shouldn't. You know, it's that kind of dialogue that just isn't helpful, and it isn't nurturing, and actually it just compounds the problem further. And that's why I love coming at this always from like that point of the nervous system, because your nervous system is designed to keep you safe. And yes, that's kind of changed as we've evolved, but when you look at it as a protector, you can start to give yourself, I just think people find it easy to give themselves more compassion because it's kind of a little bit removed from them. And they can go, well, I know you're trying to keep me safe, and I'm really grateful that someone's looking out for me. But in this situation, that's possibly not keeping me safe. It's kind of like the equivalent of not going for the job you really want, just in case they say no. Like that's not helping you. But you can see why people would say, oh, don't do it, you're not ready, because they don't want you to be rejected. So it's that sort of
So if someone is, because I know again from experience and on the podcast, this has come up about people being their worst, you know, inner critic. Would you speak to someone else the way you speak to yourself? If people listening are recognizing that that's what they're doing, how do they make that shift? How do they stop speaking to themselves in that way?
I mean, the things you've got to understand is it's a habit, right? So a lot of these things, like, they're not traits, you know, they're not fixed, they're just habits. And habits can be broken, habits can be changed, habits can be adapted. And so once you recognize, right, I've got this habit, like this thing happens, and my instinct is to go to, well, I have to do it all myself because I can't rely on anybody else. You know, that's a great one. I think particularly for women, if I don't do it, nobody else will, you know, which isn't helpful. And you go, right, well, why am I doing that? Well, because I have a fear that if I rely on somebody else, they're going to let me down, or it's not going to be done, or actually I feel safer feeling in control. You know, once you start looking at those things, you start to notice, because that narrative will sometimes still invoke a reaction in you, even if it's not that I have to do it myself seems the obvious go-to. Because also then you start taking on more as well. So why do I take on everything at work? Oh, well, because I feel like I have to. Because if I don't, I can't trust that somebody else won't do it and I don't have to pick it up, or it just needs to be done. So I'll do it. Like, it kind of can feed in 100 different ways. So that would be the first point. And so then once you identify, right, okay, I have this narrative, the next thing is to start identifying, like, what are the situations where that shows up? So just pick whatever it is. If there's just something you want to change, just pick the one thing. Don't try and pick 100 things. Just pick one and be like, right, I'm just going to really focus on when this shows up in my day. And just even the simple act of acknowledging it, you'll start going, oh, that's interesting. And you might stop there. Like, you don't have to sit and completely analyze it or anything, but just be like, oh, it shows up here and it shows up here. Then after a while, you'll be like, oh, well, why do I do that? And what do I gain from it? Because that's the thing. So anything to do with habits, I highly, highly, highly recommend James Clear's book called Atomic Habits. I think it breaks it down really, really, really well. He makes it super relatable. And it's so you have your cue, which is that kind of, this thing happens, and then you crave something. So that craving could be, like we said, that control, that fear that you can't rely on somebody else, and so you have to do it. And then you respond. So what's your habit? Like, you do this, and then you have this response. And how do you respond? And then what's your reward for that? Now, someone might go, well, I don't get any reward for that because I'm doing everything myself and I don't want to. And it's like, no, that's genuinely how you feel, but you are getting a reward. So whether it's that security that you know it's done, that security that, someone's not going to judge you for not doing it, because you might have a crazy narrative that if you don't do everything, someone's going to say you're lazy, which isn't true, but that's just a story you developed. And then you break it down. So you've started to watch when you get the cue, and now you want to change what that craving is. So actually, really, now I've got this cue, what do I want? Do I want to do it for myself? Or do I want to ask somebody else to do it? Do I want to ask for help? Do I need to do it right now is another one, because sometimes you get that cue of it's all got to be done, and then you just do it without even thinking it. Do I want to do it? Do I need to do it? Does it need to be done now? Or is it even important? So you can start to look at those kind of things, and then you can alter your response. And the more you practice that, the more the neural pathways in your brain get linked together, and then you get your reward. And then over time, that pathway gets more and more worn until that's kind of your automatic. Now, you might find at times that you're like overly stressed. You might go back to that old habit, but you've got your new one to fall back on. And so it's a slow process. But I kind of sort of say it's a bit like when you go somewhere you've not been before, and you put the address into Google. And the first time you drive, you just wait, till Google shouts at you to tell you to go left and right. And you're not really paying that much attention other than what you're being shouted at and told to do. And then maybe the next time you go, you start to maybe pay a little bit of attention to the surroundings, being like, oh, I recognize that. And then the more you travel the route, eventually you don't need Google. And you can just, and it's the same thing in the pathways in our brain. Is kind of how I explain it.
I love that. I find that so fascinating, especially when we start talking about pathways. And I love James's book as well. I have just recently read that. I love his analogy on the marbles, I think it's sales calls, like moving the marble from one jar to the other. But I loved everything that you said in that. And what I'm hearing is it's like that, recognizing it first and foremost, and not having to analyze it straight off, like, oh, okay, that's what's happening. And then taking it slow. And I can relate to so many things, in my people pleasing mentality. When I think back to the corporate days, and even now, like an email pings and you might think, I need to respond now, for whatever reason, whatever your brain. And it's kind of like, actually, no, taking that time. And we have a little freebie at the moment, a little a guide on setting boundaries, because I feel so passionately about this, and that I didn't do it in my early career. And I think that interrelates to what we're talking about. If you're taking on too much at home, at life, at work, and you're not setting the boundaries, and you are responding to emails as soon as they come in from the boss or whatever, then you don't have your clear boundaries. So it all kind of ties in, doesn't it? So it's taking that time to recognize what you're doing and what you want to change. I also loved what you said about not taking 100 things and just focusing on one at a time. Do you work predominantly with women? Have you worked with a lot of women on burnout? Can you share any stories?
Yeah, I mean, what's really interesting is in coaching, I work with women. I haven't had any male clients, not because I don't take male clients, just because I haven't. but I come from a predominantly male industry. So that I always think that's kind of quite interesting. And it is, you know, one thing when we talk about boundaries is it can be a lot harder to reset your boundaries in some way that you're familiar with. So I knew in my corporate job, my boundaries in my previous job were not what I wanted for the new job, because I knew at some point I was going to have children, and I knew that that wasn't going to be sustainable. So I reset my boundaries in terms of time. And so it kind of worked quite well. That was a bit easy, but at that point I wasn't suffering burnout. I didn't necessarily have any struggles. It was just something that I was aware of, that I mean, because it was a very different time when I had kids, you know, it's like 11, 12 years ago. And it is a lot different in the workplace, or in the places that I work, compared to, you know, when I had my eldest. And I was very conscious of, so it would kind of seem a bit seamless, you know, it wouldn't be a raise of red flag that she's going at 5:30, or I've always tended to go into the office early rather than stay late anyway. So, and no one notices when you're in the office early, which is why I go in early, so I can actually get work done, because that's why I'm there. I'm not there for FaceTime. You know, if you stay late, I have to find people come and talk to you, and you're like, no, I'm here because I've got stuff to do. But anyway, that's an aside. And so it can be harder to reset those boundaries when you're somewhere that you are. But once you start practicing it in the environment you're in, like, that's probably the bigger challenge you're going to face. And even if that's a struggle, and even if you don't feel that it's been, I'm going to say successful, it's not the right word. I'm not really big on using the word success, because I think that's an external validator, and because it looks different for everybody, but it's not to the level that you would like it to be. And you decide, actually, this is not the environment for me, because now I've reset the boundaries, I've reset the expectations, and we're clearly not aligned. What I want and how I want to work, and what you want from me, no longer me. I need to go somewhere else. It means that when you go to that new place, you've kind of done the hard work. And I've a client recently, that's what she did. She was umming and ahhing about wanting to leave for a long time, and she had multiple job offers, and one was paying a lot more, and she was just like, you know, I don't feel I can do this work and start somewhere new, and I think it's not going to be what I hope it to be, and I feel that would kind of be counterintuitive. And so she stayed where she was, and they did lots of things and kind of adjusted what they were doing. And then after that, she was like, I still don't want to be there. And now she's literally just, in the next week, she'll start in her new job, in her new role, which she's actually excited about, because she's not trying to escape something. You know, we get to that point, I think, when we've got burnout. I always say it's like, you feel like you want to burn it all down. Like, you literally want to burn it all down and start again. And I mean, I love a clean start. I love a fresh start. We were talking about it being September and how I love September. I think that's just conditioned in me from like education. And so it gives you that, if you burn it all down, but then you're going to rebuild the same. Whereas actually, you know, I kind of look at it like, this is a renovation project in your old company, and renovation projects can go great and you can love it. Or by the time you're done with the renovation project, you're so like sick of looking at it. You know, all the little quirks that aren't quite what you want, and it may still feel a bit too higgledy-piggledy, or like, or you've just fallen out of love with it because of all the work that's been involved in it, and you're ready for something new. Then you move, and you might go move to a new build, you know, and where you just have to go and put pictures on the wall. You know, you don't have to smash the walls down or put in a new kitchen or whatever. And so that's kind of the stuff that I kind of see with my clients, and a lot of them end up staying where they are, at least for you know, a year or two before they're sort of ready to move on.
I can really relate to that. I think I'm a bit of a escape, go, leave, run, and I bet loads of people listening can relate to that as well. So that's really interesting. We could talk all day, but we're gonna have to wrap up. I am fascinated by the work that you do, and hopefully we're going to do a session, aren't we, in the Jobs for Women membership. I find your knowledge so fascinating, and I think it links brilliantly to your experience in corporate. I think you have so many relatable stories, so I think we can do something really exciting with our community. So if people want to connect with you, work with you, where's the best place to find you?
And best place to find me is probably over on Instagram. So you can find me at the Self Leadership Coach. Yeah, that's mostly where I hang out. I try and keep, overwhelmed and all the rest of it. I keep to one platform. That's where you'll find me.
Well done. And I'll put that link in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us on the Jobs for Women podcast.
Thank you.
I really hope you enjoyed this week's episode with Carly. I am fascinated by the work that Carly does. And I love the example that she talked about sort of clenching up the body and then releasing. And I know I said it on the podcast, but I do teach that a little bit in yoga. And I do think it makes you become really aware of your body where you're holding tension or stress. And I think it's really powerful. If you are suffering burnout, I really hope that the things that Carly talked about, the examples that she gave, have helped you in some way. And don't forget to reach out to her for some advice or just to connect with her if you are going through it. And don't forget to share, friends, family. We've got a great community at Jobs for Women. We have our free membership, and we've got our community area that is now live. So if you're not in the membership, you need to head over to community.jobsforwomen.co.uk/join. And that's it for another week. I have loved having you here. I hope you've enjoyed it. If there's any guests or any topics or anything that you would like us to cover on the podcast, reach out, hello@jobsforwomen.co.uk. So take care of yourselves. Until next time, I will see you very soon.